Welcome, Becky.
Welcome, Becky.
Okay, roll call. Corby Chappelle,
Here.
Natasha Cronin,
Here.
Sally Cohen,
Here.
Rebecca J,
Here.
Tori Middlestadt,
Here.
Alex Paraskavis,
Here.
Kate Schwarzler.
Here.
Thank you.
All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome, Becky. Okay, everybody have a chance to review the minutes of the August 3rd, 2020 meeting. And we have any corrections, we can make a note at this time. If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I move we approve the minutes as submitted. This is Sally.
All those in
second.
favor?
Oh.
Okay. Oh, I got a second. Great. Thanks, Alex. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, the minutes are approved. We'll move on to visitor and public comments. Anybody out there, Karen, that wishes to speak on anything other than the business tonight?
No, we just those that have signed up.
Okay. I don't believe we have any unfinished business from prior meetings, so I'll go ahead and move on to new business, where we are going to open a public hearing tonight. I'll go ahead and open it, double knock, for SUB-2020-01. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing this correctly, the Spies Industrial Subdivision. The public hearing before the Independence Planning Commission is now open for application sub 2020-01 Spies Independent Subdivision. Do any commissioners need to disclose any conflicts of interest, bias, ex parte contacts, or site visits? None. Everybody visited the site? Okay. Oregon land use law requires several items to be read into the record at the beginning of each and every public hearing. And this will be read by Fred tonight, please.
All right. Hi there, everybody. All right. The applicable substantive criteria upon which the case will be decided are found in the Independence Development Code, subchapters 11, Administrative Provisions, 21, Medium Density Residential Zone, 55, Stormwater Management Requirements, and 90, Subdivision Regulations. These criteria are addressed in the staff report and will be read and summarized by staff during the presentation of the staff report. All testimony, arguments, and evidence presented must be directed toward these criteria or other criteria in the Independence Comprehensive Plan or Independence Municipal Code, which a speaker believes to apply to this decision, ORS 197.7635A. The failure of anyone to raise an issue accompanied, hold on, I'll keep on going. The failure of anyone to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford this commission and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue will preclude appeal to the City Council and the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals, LUBA, based on that issue, ORS 197.7635C. An issue which may be the basis for an appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals shall be raised not later than the close of the record at or following the final evidentiary hearing on the proposal before the city. Such issues shall be raised and accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the commission and the parties an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue. ORS 197.7631. The failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the city to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. ORS 197.7963B. Basically, that's something that the state requires us to read before every hearing. Anyways, continue on, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Fred. We will now have the staff report, please.
All right. Let me try and share my screen here. Hold on. Oop. Jason, can you allow me to share my screen real quick? All right. Hopefully this is working. Can you all see that?
Yeah.
All right. Oh, start the slideshow. There it is. All right. So the spies, I don't know if it's spies or spies. I like to call it spies independent subdivision. So hopefully that's not wrong. So anyways, this subdivision is proposed at 940 South 7th Street. You can see sort of this piece right here. This is 7th Street. This is Cedar. Henry Hill Elementary is directly to the east. You can see it better here. Cedar Court, Cedar. This is 7th here. G Street is right here. F Street is right here. Mountain Fir Park is directly to the west of the site.
Hey, Fred, sorry to interrupt. I think we're seeing the presenter view, not your slides.
Yo, thank you.
You're welcome.
Huh, I wonder what exactly.
You
No,
have
it
to
does.
switch the screen in your PowerPoint. Yeah.
All right, hold on one second. Let me see if I can.
Or just take it out of presenter view.
Can you see it now?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I had two options of which screen to share, and I selected the wrong one. I apologize. So anyways, again, hey, let's, right here, hey, F Street is up here. Do you see that? Here's G Street, Henry Hill building over here. You got Mountain Fir Park directly to the west, and Cedar Court directly to the south. Now, when we look at the project site, you can see this is getting sort of closer here. Directly across the way is, oh shoot, what is the name of that road? I knew it. I want to call it like Riverwood Court or something like that. So it's directly across the street. And then this is a proposal. There's 4 lots proposed. Each of the lots is proposed to have a duplex on it. You can see 5,500 square foot lots throughout the majority of it. And then this final lot back here is 10,000 square feet. Now in the zone, the maximum density that's allowed is 12 units per acre. This development is in conformance with that that allowed density. It looks like it's going to meet all the required setbacks of the zone. You can see there's a 10-foot side yard setback right here for a corner lot. You can see too that they're showing the rear yard setbacks, appropriate side yard setbacks, and whatnot. They are proposing a private drive on the south side of the street that's about 20 feet wide right there. And this sidewalk right here, I believe is proposed at 5 feet through the site. You can see right here, sort of garages, or these are driveways in front of each of the units right here. Are there any questions about that so far? Just sort of orienting you to the project. Now, basically, staff looked at this. We feel like this is largely in conformance with the development code. We have recommended approval of this with 15 conditions. The vast majority of those conditions relate to things that we are going to be expecting in the civil drawings for the site. There are a couple of conditions that we will draw your attention to, and we can talk about those in greater detail. Now, I'll just point them out to you. On page 9 of your staff report, you'll see condition 5, which requires all utilities to the lot to be installed below ground. And it says specifically that a power line on the front of the lot, which is about right here on the lot, has to be moved. That's one of the conditions. That's condition 5. Condition 8 talks about switching this access point to the north side of the site instead of keeping it on the south side of the site. And I'll explain that a little more in just a bit. And then condition 12 talks about an access way through the site, similar to what you folks required for the Brandy Meadows 2 subdivision to get over to that park, if you remember that. So anyways, going into each of these, the lot currently has a house on it, and right in front of the house, there is a power pole. Everything to the south of that point, coming down this way, is all underground. The power pole is the stop of the overhead power. Now, we do have a requirement in, and you'll note it in page 20 of your packet, page 20 of your packet, page 11 of the staff findings. We have a requirement that says above ground utility prohibited. It says in all new subdivisions in the City of Independence hereafter approved by the commission, it shall be unlawful for any service utility to be installed or used above the surface of the ground except on a temporary basis upon a special permit issued by the building official. Now, based on that, that language, installed or used, we have recommended the condition that that utility pole be moved to the north property line, and then that the utilities be continued across the frontage of the site underground. If there's any questions about that, we can talk about them in just a second. So there's that requirement. The second requirement, or the second proposed condition that we wanted to get in further detail about, is this one, the intersection spacing. Now, when we look at our requirements for intersection spacing, and you can see them, they're really brought out on page 23 of your packet, where it talks about alignment of streets, where it talks about offsets of streets, like in page 25 of your packet. And then even continuing on, the intersection spacing standards, basically the requirements that we seek in this code, which include like a spacing of 125 feet from nearby intersections. This does not meet that requirement at this point. You can see this from right here to right here is 250 feet. This from Riverwood Court right here to this is about 100 feet. That would not meet that intersection spacing requirement for 7th Street. Also, I'll just point out page 29 of the staff report. You'll see, or page 29 of your packet, I apologize. You'll see our access management requirements for city streets. And 7th Street, which is a collector in the city, requires the minimum spacing between intersections to be 250 feet. Now, this is somewhat of an issue because the applicant originally came in and proposed the access point on the north side of the property. And the city, in the pre-application, encouraged them to consider other options, including potentially on the south part of the site, to consider accessing the site. Part of the reason for that was this right here. If you put a half street improvement along this line, it's still going to be, or a little south of this line, if you put a half street improvement here, it's still going to be kind of offset. And both the city and the proponent of the project had trouble trying to figure out how exactly to make that work. We're recommending the condition now, in part because when we look at our, oh, hey, look at the access management standards right there, the 250 feet, that's really called out there. When we look at the project, okay, shoot, I thought I had a better image of this. There is a better image in your packet, but when we consider this lot right here has the great potential of developing in a way similar to what is proposed right here, right? And if that were the case, then we would have this intersection, this intersection, this intersection, and then an intersection right here and an intersection right here, all in sort of a row. Now, we all know that 7th Street is not the most ideal street right now in terms of, I mean, we all know that people have concerns about traffic issues on 7th Street right now. Encouraging or not considering a way to consolidate access points does not seem like something that's the most ideal situation. So anyways, that's why we recommended the condition. Now, that when you hear from the proponent, they will explain in greater detail why exactly they feel like the southern access point is more ideal. I mean, some of the things, they'll talk about it in further detail, but some of the things that they'll mention is it really does, when you come on the north side, it does impact this property in a pretty significant way. It also sort of encourages, it encumbers the property and really forces them to come out to this point in the future, which they felt wasn't ideal. There's numerous standards in our code, however, that really encouraged us to put this condition on. One of those is, hey, when you can see future development likely to happen in the area, consider how that future development's going to occur. And that in part is why we've encouraged, why we've recommended the condition as it is. If you folks have any questions about that further, we can definitely talk about that later as well. Now, the third thing is we have recommended, the third item that we'll get in further detail about is a proposed access way through the site. Now, when we look at pedestrianism in the area, it's sort of in this large stretch where it's not exactly direct to get into Mountain Fir Park. You can see this is a project site right here. If you were to walk from the project site and try and get to Mountain Fir Park, this is before Sunset Meadows was really built. I apologize that this isn't a better aerial, but I think we can blame Google actually. If you came in here, it would be about a quarter mile coming through the south, through Sunset Meadows. It would also be about a quarter mile going up to G Street and coming into Mountain Fir Park. We all know, and we all sort of hold the value that, boy, we would love a nice non-motorized system in that area. A quarter mile is typically what's considered the limits of easy walkability. And so encouraging a pedestrian access through the site to allow the folks here within the development an easy way to get into Mountain Fir Park is a condition that is supported by the code and we think makes a lot of sense for this development. So based on that, that's basically everything that I've got. We have run through all the necessary procedural requirements for this. We issued a notice of the proposal to properties within 250 feet. We've routed it around here. And this is what we're recommending. Again, we're recommending approval with 15 conditions, and you can see those conditions in detail in the staff report. Are there any questions?
I had a couple, if that's okay. Okay, first of all, when you talk about putting the power line north, how far north will it be? Will it be far enough north that if the driveway is on the north side of the property, it's not going to hinder that intersection?
Basically what, basically how we would anticipate that it would be put on the north property line. It could
But
go,
Isn't
it
the
could-
north property line where you're thinking about putting the access road?
right, so there would be a couple of feet space between that north property line and the access road. Your question is a great one. But I mean, here's part of the reason why the condition related to the power line is on there. We require frontage improvements, basically for all projects, right? If a road is not approved completely to standard, we require those improvements all the way through the frontage of the project site. This is essentially that same sort of concept where we would be seeking the frontage of the frontage improvements back to that north property line, where everything would be undergrounded to that north property line. At that point, any future development on the adjacent parcel, we would then require them to install the utilities underground in exactly the same manner.
I understand that. I'm just questioning that you would have to, if you're talking about the roadway, as I understood it, it will be at the north property line, which means that pole has to be further north to be out of the way of the cars.
Right.
So it
That's
would be on the property in front of, it would be in front of the property to the north rather
Right.
than on this property.
Right, exactly.
Okay, that's my question.
Exactly.
The other question I have is, I understand the need and the desire for the access to the park, but where you're accessing the park there, it comes into a wild area that's never been developed and has been left for the animals, mainly the deer, but other animals too. And also because the master gardeners have run out of energy. It also, if you did due west from there, you come to a ditch and it would interrupt the drainage to try and fill that in to get access way. The other ways, if you would go north along the tree line and into the park, you're going through two different property lines, other people's property, unless you cut into the park and then take your roadway or your access, your pathway into the park that would join it in the urban park area, urban orchard area, where there is a bridge over that road already. I just wondered if anybody's talked to parks about that or talked to the master gardeners about how that might work out.
No, we have not talked about exactly how that would work out. We do see I mean, I'll be honest with you, like we do see the potential that that a walkway through that portion of the park would be a nice feature. There is also a southern extent of the drainage ditch that you're talking about that looks like it could, you know, it's not it's not fully a ditch through the whole thing. There's quite a bit of a ditch through a lot of it, but
To west of that wooded area, it's a pretty good ditch.
yeah, exactly. So no, we haven't talked about design, but you know, this actually offers the opportunity to consider something like that as a potential design, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I just think we need to be talking to the Parks and Rec and to the master gardeners about how you're going to take something in there with the least amount of damage to what they've been trying to do and making it the easiest access without having to fill in ditches or build more bridges.
You bet.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Becky. Any other questions from Fred?
Fred, this is Sally. I have a question about parking.
Yeah.
So the staff report talks about that there would be one space for each of the duplexes. There would be a garage and one space. Is there on-street parking anticipated on the access road?
So that's a great question, Sally. When I talk about one space required, basically the requirement in the code is that each unit provides a garage parking spot. So when I say one garage parking spot is provided, that's essentially what it means. There will also be parking in the driveway. There's a couple of other, it looks like overfill spots sort of at the end of the driveway that I don't know what their intent is for those, if those are just for the end unit or if they would be for the larger development. But yes, they meet our parking requirements. They provide one garage spot and then one driveway spot. Essentially, you could get a car in the driveway. Now, your question about is parking available on the road? There is not going to be parking allowed on the road. The right-of-way is a 20-foot right-of-way, which is our minimum private roadway width. And that's also the requirement for a fire truck. And so we don't allow any parking on a 20-foot wide road. Another part of the reason why we see there being a potential benefit of moving it to the north portion of the site, because if that north portion ever develops, then potentially that roadway could get added to, and there could potentially be parking on this street. You know, it's the whole concept is sort of like a half street improvement where you could add to the other side and get some potential parking in the future. Now, how exactly that works, I don't know at this point, but we do see that potential.
So will there be enforcement on that parking, and will there be a lot more parking on 7th Street, which is already kind of narrow with those big trucks going through all the time? You know, they're 2-bedroom
Right.
duplexes. I can see there's going to be at least 2 cars per duplex.
Right. So actually, shoot, I want to look up something real quick, but I won't. So what was the first part of your question again? I got.
If there's not parking, which I understood from your staff report, because it's all going to be red because the fire trucks need access.
Oh, right. Enforcement.
Right.
Yeah. So we do not enforce a private street. We do not actually have the ability to enforce parking requirements on a private street. It's however, the fire marshal does have the authority to enforce parking regulations on a private street, and if people are parking on the street, then potentially they could be subject to his enforcement.
So there could be a lot more parking on 7th Street then, because people probably will fill their garages with all their stuff, like most people, and won't park in their garage, especially if it's only a 1-car garage. And that leaves not a lot of room if you have more than 2 cars per house.
Right. I mean, our code actually our code doesn't, our code for multiple family and attached dwellings actually says that we want no more than 2 spaces per unit is what it actually says. So, I mean, they're providing that 2 spaces, which is exactly what our code is looking for.
I'm just worrying about more parking on 7th, which during the day with all the big trucks is already really difficult to traverse.
Right, I understand.
Thank you.
Any other questions of Fred?
Fred, I do have a quick question on condition 11, where any trip hazards exist along 7th Street. Can you expand on that a little bit, and just, are there any potential trip hazards that you're thinking of, or?
Yeah, so basically what the applicant is essentially doing is they're recognizing the fact that they have a sidewalk out there, that they've got a pretty complete frontage. I have gone out and I've tried to mark as many trip hazards as I could find. Part of that is for that one project. I can't remember what is that called? Where it's like job training to improve the sidewalks. Anybody remember what that's called? Anyways, we're hoping to have some of those sidewalks improved by folks, and but in the process of doing it, I did note that there was potentially one out there, and so I didn't get a chance to go out there, but I looked at the map that I had created, and I found one on the map that I had created. So if there is one, if there's multiple, any sort of trip hazards out there, that condition is related to that. So
Okay, thanks.
yeah.
So it's pedestrian. I wasn't sure if that was car trip hazard.
Oh
or
yeah, no.
pedestrian
Yeah, no,
trip
thank you.
hazard.
That's great.
That helps clarify. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
that's great.
Okay, any more questions? If there are no more questions, we'll get to the applicant and others may favor and speak portion of tonight's program. So before hearing testimony, all who wish to speak, please fill out a speaker card. I do have one speaker card back here with me pertaining to this. And is the applicant in the chamber, Karen? Oh, she's on mute.
I will go check, but
The
he wasn't
applicant is on the line, and Jason is gonna pull him into the meeting here in just a second, and then I think I'm gonna control the PowerPoint for him. So
Okay.
Fred, can you give me the name of the applicant?
yeah, Peter Cedars.
Good evening.
Okay, Mr. Cedars, could we have you give us your full name and your address, please?
Absolutely. My name is Peter. My last name is Cedars, spelled S-E-A-D-E-R-S. I'm with MSS Engineering, representing the owner of the property and the developer. And address is 541, I'm sorry, that's my phone number. Let's try again. 215 Northwest 4th Street in Corvallis, 97330.
Okay, we'll go ahead and I think Fred is going to get you involved with some of the presentation here. So you can go ahead and discuss your project with us.
Thank you. Well, I want to just, while Fred is getting that set up, I wanted to just start by saying thank you for allowing me to join remotely. Had some circumstances come up that made it impossible for me to join in person. And so I don't know if this is something you guys typically do, but I do appreciate you allowing me to make my presentation remotely like this. So, and I'd also just like to thank Fred for a nice summary of the project. I think he hit many of the main points, and I'm going to try to illuminate or add on a little bit more background for you all in terms of how the process that we went through and the things that we were considering in terms of how we laid the project out so that you can make a final decision about how to create or how to establish the conditions of approval for the project. So Fred, if you would just jump to the next page here. So there's really three things that I would like to kind of address in my presentation this evening, and I will try to do this as quickly and efficiently as possible, but there is, like I said, a little bit of background, especially on the first one that I'd like to address. As far as all of the other conditions of approval, we have no issues with those. You know, the pedestrian connection to along the, you know, at least to the west side of the property wasn't something we were anticipating in the design, but seems like it has the potential at least to be a benefit both to the city and to the developer. And so, you know, we don't really have any objection to that if that's something that you guys feel would be beneficial for the project. The ones that I would like to talk about tonight, number 8, which is, Fred touched on there regarding the location of the access and relocating that to the north of the property. Condition number 5, as was already talked about a little bit as well, which is the condition there to relocate the existing power pole. I think there is, of course, the need for utilities to be underground, which partly triggers that, but I believe it's also to some degree as a result of condition number 8. So I think those two are somewhat linked together. I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. And then there was something else that was noted in the engineering memo, which is when we first started the design of this project and layout, the water quality standards in your code didn't really spell out the need for water quality facilities. It looks like that's something that was added more recently, which is fine. The only thing there is we would like to make sure that there's a little bit of additional flexibility in the way that the conditions are written, and make sure that there's just some clarification there. So I'll go through that here in a minute. Go ahead and, if you don't mind going to the next slide there. Thank you, Fred. So as Fred already pointed out, the property there is at 940 South 7th Street, and you got the name right, Fred. It is Riverwood Court, along that basically nearly aligns to the north line of this property, and you could really almost imagine a very similar layout on this property and the one north of it to Riverwood Court and the surrounding lots there. If you were to just kind of take those and mirror them across onto 7th Street, I'm sure that was at some point the idea of what might happen there. If you don't mind going to the next slide. So as an engineer, and obviously it's established in city policy, our first instinct is always to try to align access points to minimize any conflicts that might arise in terms of turning motions. I'm sure you can all relate to having come to an intersection and found there to be an offset of 15, 20, 30 feet, and trying to make that turn with another car coming the opposite direction can be dangerous or at least inconvenient at best. And so as much as possible, of course, we want to try to align those access points. And that was our approach that we took when we first started on this design. As Fred noted, we actually had 2 pre-development meetings on this over the last year and a half, 2 years, as we were working through the process here. And that's the concept that we brought in both times. At the second pre-development meeting, we actually went through quite a lengthy discussion around these access points. And so although the desire would be to align those, unfortunately, the way that the properties are configured makes it almost impossible to really come up with an ideal alignment. As you can see, the north line of our property is already set slightly south of the center line of Riverwood Court. So you can, as we proposed in this application, as well as the other one, developing the access along the north right-of-way leaves us kind of 3 options. And so the first one would be to create the sort of a half right-of-way, if you will, on our property as a public right-of-way. In our discussion with the city, it became apparent that this was, creating that as a public right-of-way would not be acceptable, and now there's a number of reasons for that. But the first one is really, you can see this does not create a good alignment between the two. You can see that the north edge of where our access would be, at least initially, would almost line up with the south edge of Riverwood Court. So that's quite an undesirable alignment at this point. And a future build out to the north would not really correct that. You can see, we would widen, the future developer would probably have to widen that about 8 to 10 feet to meet the city standard to take it from 20 feet to 30 feet, or I don't remember if it's 28 or 30 feet, but it's one of those two. I have this, I believe, drawn in at 30 feet currently. So, but you can see that even as that property to the north, if it were to develop out, you would still have a pretty severe misalignment between those two streets. The other problem that arose as we were discussing with this was that if it were public right-of-way, I believe Kai, and he can chime in and remind me on this, but I believe he indicated that the city would not be able to maintain the street as with the street sweeper. They could get in and maintain the utilities, but maintaining the street itself isn't something that they would want to take over for this with this type of a sort of a half right-of-way configuration. And the other possibility, I suppose, would be that we dedicated the entire right-of-way on our property, which would be difficult from an economic point of view for the developer. But the other, problem with that would be, of course, that it would even exacerbate the offset of these two streets even further. So, in terms of trying to align these access points, that wasn't really a great option. The other issue that comes up here is you can see from, I've shown the kind of the location of that existing house that's on there. Really, you are requiring that future property to demolish the existing house in order to develop that property. So that is that's a fairly significant burden on that property. And, we had a fair amount of discussion around that issue at the pre-development meeting as well. So the second kind of option that could be pursued there would be similar to what we're doing now, to where the access on the north line would be a private road, and as is currently conditioned, that we would provide an access easement to the adjacent property so that they could then widen the road with another private road that would be adjacent to it, and then take access on the combined access way. So you can see that this has the same misalignment problem really as the public right-of-way option. That really is, it's not solving the alignment issue itself, and it has the same burden on the property to the north there, in terms of the fact that it's requiring demolition of that existing house, really, in order to develop that access point. The other probably the biggest issue with this one, from our point of view, is that it provides access to the properties to the north, but it does not really give any mechanism for us to require them to participate in the maintenance of that private road. So at some point, then you have 8 lots, which would all be taking access off of the same private roadway, or 2 separate private roadways, but there really would not be any mechanism there for establishing joint and shared maintenance responsibilities, which, for each of the lots in there. And it's difficult to see how we would precondition that in order to essentially, again, burden that future developer with maintenance of a road that we're building now. So that's a pretty significant issue in terms of trying to do this with 2 separate private roads that we would see. And the other part about that is, anytime you have these shared access points that are in private, of course, it creates more potential for legal issues and conflict there that I think would be a fairly high risk. The other thing about this particular solution is that it's creating higher intensity onto this misaligned access. So in other words, higher intensity traffic use. So currently, if we take a private road along the south line, there would be 4 lots that are taking access, and there would be a greater spacing distance from Riverwood Court, even though it doesn't meet the standard of 125 feet or greater. It's close, and by requiring both of these properties to take access from the same point, which is offset now by about 25 or 30 feet, we're actually creating more intense use on a closer spacing. So what from a 10,000 foot view looks like it's a nice alignment actually turns out that at the 400 foot view, you can see that it's really actually a worse situation to create. And then by combining those 2 properties on the same access, it's not only 4 lots, now it's 8 lots that are taking the same access point with this misaligned access. The third option, you can go to the next slide there, Fred. The third option really would be to do 2 separate and parallel private roads. This was an option that was also discussed and not favored during our pre-development meetings and process. Essentially, it may be a little bit difficult to see in this case, but there'll be about a 2-foot gap on the north side of our current asphalt between the property line and the roadway, and an access point there, which with the red arrow in the picture and the yellow arrow, you can see those conflict. And now on top of this, you do something similar, presumably along the same line or perhaps on the other line. But if we're trying to align these accesses, then it seems like, you would probably anticipate the future developer would have to do this same thing. And now we add a third access with conflicting movements into that intersection rather than, so it actually, I think, exacerbates the problem rather than relieving it. Another couple issues, oh, sorry, if you could go back, Fred, a couple more points on that real quick. The other problems with this solution that we really didn't like was it creates, potential for confusion for people trying to access these properties. Normally, you would probably think that there's going to be, if you pull in one of those, that you could probably get across there. So, visitors showing up are more likely to go down the wrong place and have to turn around. Deliveries and possibly even fire if they're responding to an emergency, ending up in the wrong one of those driveways. And of course, this has the same problems there in terms of just the encumbering that future property to demolish the existing house. Okay, next slide. As Fred pointed out, the development or the access pattern that we're proposing does not meet the city standard for access spacing. So I think what has to be recognized here is that neither our solution nor the city's proposed condition will resolve that conflict. What you really have to choose between is whether or not you're going to have a 25-foot offset access or a 100-foot offset access. And we believe that the access there from our property at the south line to Riverwood Court, which, like as Fred pointed out, is approximately 100 feet. I don't have that exact measurement off the top of my head, but it's at least 100 feet or probably a little bit more. But it's at least close to the standard, whereas the placing those accesses on the north line of the property really, if you're trying to maximize the distance, then obviously 25 feet offset is not as good as a 100-foot offset. Neither one complies with the standard, and we recognize that, but we're just trying to find the best solution to the conditions that exist there. The other advantage of what we're doing is it allows more flexibility, and it really, one of those things that's going on there is the encumbrance of that north property to have to demolish that house in the event that it wants to develop, whereas there certainly are other solutions that could be pursued for development of that property without necessarily having to demolish that existing house. If you place the access on our property on the north side, I think those options become much more limited. And then, yeah, just avoiding, and then the last point there in terms of why we believe this is a better option is that certainly I think it leaves your options open in the future in terms of what happens with that property and just provides more flexibility. So our request in this case is that you would remove condition 8 from the conditions of approval that for the project. Condition number 5, the power pole, section 90.80 section I, as Fred alluded to, says it's unlawful for any utilities to be installed or used above the surface of the ground. So my interpretation of that, and it's how I've seen it handled on many other projects in other jurisdictions, and I don't presume to know how you guys have treated this, but typically the word installed there implies that it is for new utilities that are being constructed. Typically when I've been required to, when we have to connect to existing utilities, we're not being required to take all of the existing power lines down and put them underground. And I think that if you think of it in that regard, the language makes sense, given the fact that if we were to relocate that to the north line, or we would still be, the word there saying used is not referring to the point of connection. That's referring to the utilities that are being installed and servicing the lots. So moving the pole to the north line, we would still be quote unquote using that pole, but only as a point of connection. So I believe the language there is really referring to the new installation of new utilities rather than connection to existing utilities. The other thing about this is, relocating that pole is going to impact and perhaps require us to access onto existing properties where we don't necessarily have access rights. So that's something certainly of concern to us. So you can see the aerial coming off of there to the house to the north, and then there's drops coming off of that pole, which are, I believe they're going across the street. I don't remember where those are going exactly. Next slide. So a couple things about that. Really, I believe that, my understanding of staff's reason for including that condition, and I may be incorrect on that, is if the access point is on the north, then it's possible that pole might need to be shifted a foot or two, and I think that relocation is something that should be determined during design and not necessarily issued as a condition of approval as part of the planning process. So we certainly will relocate that pole if it is necessary to avoid conflict with the access, in the event that you guys determine that we need to bring the access along the north. And we certainly will be constructing all new utilities underground. We would like to not have it be a condition, however, that we relocate that pole unless it's necessary for the access. So the proposed modification that we are requesting for condition 5 would be just the addition of the word new. So all new utility to lots shall be installed below ground, and then the striking of the remainder of that, which would indicate that that the pole needed to be relocated simply as a condition of development, regardless of its relationship to the access. Next slide. The last one is a little bit more of a technical issue, and I will try to illustrate this as simply as possible here. Are you guys? Hopefully, everybody is able to read my little notes there. But one of the conditions, or I'm sorry, one of the code sections that changed a little bit from when we first started envisioning this project to when we submitted our application was the requirement for water quality facilities. And the existing storm system is fairly shallow out there. We have anticipated providing detention, and that would be done in an oversized pipe within the private roadway. And so on my graphic there, you can see the light blue area is the storm pipe that we have included in the roadway for storing water to minimize the rate of runoff. The orange line up above it is the roadway, the surface of the roadway, and then I've illustrated there on either end the difference from the top of that pipe to the roadway elevation, and it's I believe it's, I can't read my own notes there on my screen. I hope you can read them on yours. I will look at them. Let's see here. I've got, it's 1.88 feet is the on the shallow end, and about 2.7 feet at the high end. Typically, in order for most water quality systems, we would need to have around 2 to 2.5 feet of drop to make that system function. And so I'm concerned, obviously we haven't incorporated the water quality into the design yet, and we certainly will attempt to do that, but I am concerned that it may not be technically feasible for us to do that. And so really what we are requesting is not a modification from the code, it is just a design flexibility to give the Public Works Director design flexibility to approve an alternate that is as close to conformance as possible. So some of the techniques that we would use to try to mitigate water quality impacts, if we're not able to fully install a typical water quality system, would be something like pervious asphalt pavement to minimize the impervious area, potentially using rain barrels or disconnected rain drains to capture water from the roof runoff and those sorts of things, things that would help to minimize the impact to water quality, but may require a little bit of design flexibility. Can you go to the next slide there, Fred? So what we're asking for is, and I numbered this incorrectly, this says condition number 15, it should have said condition number 16, so I apologize for that misnumbering on my slide here. But something that says our proposed condition for this case would be where installation of water quality measures are deemed to be infeasible, the Public Works Director shall have authority to approve alternative solutions that provide the greatest conformance with IDC Chapter 55 and Public Works Standards practical. And Fred, next slide. So really what we're asking for here is 3 requests. Number 1 being on condition 8 that you guys strike that one from the approved conditions. Number 5 modification to that that would only require underground for the new utilities rather than that point of connection on the existing pole. And then really on number 16, it would just be some design flexibility authority to make sure that that's just clarified, that the Public Works Director could allow us to help make this project feasible. And with that, I would answer any questions you might have.
I had a couple of questions.
Okay.
First of all, as I read the reports, when they're talking about moving the roadway to the north, it's with the anticipation that when the property to the north is developed, that street will become wider and become a public street instead of two private roads next to each other, so that the city would then be responsible for cleaning the street and maintaining it, and it would be wide enough for the city to claim it as public. So I'm not quite sure why you're saying you'd have to have two private roads. The other thing, I live south of there, and putting another entryway south of where Riverwood Court is makes it even more hazardous as people come up 7th or turn off of Cedar to go north. I would think it's better to have it as close as possible to the other road. The other question I had was, aren't you guys destroying the house that's on that property now? And why would you assume that anybody who buys the property to the north wouldn't demolish the house that's there? And then my third question had to do, I really didn't understand why your storm sewer can't be deeper. So I just don't understand that. I understand what you're asking for, but I'm not understanding the reason. Thank you.
Sure. Let me, if I miss a question, please feel free to remind me so I don't miss. I want to try to make sure I answer those. So the first question was, why would that street not become public? And really the reason there, Fred, could you go back to my option 1 slide? Right there. Okay. So we had a long conversation about this at the pre-development meeting. The first issue is that there isn't really a mechanism that I'm aware of for the city to accept that private right-of-way. Number one, I mean, right now, if we were to dedicate that as public right-of-way right now, the city wouldn't be able to maintain it. So that means currently it would need to be a private road. And I'm not sure what the mechanism would be for then transitioning that later on to a public street. The other thing is, if there were a mechanism to make that happen, there are going to be modifications to the street as it's constructed now. There'd be modifications required in order to turn that into a public street. So if it were public, it should have a bulb end, kind of like what we're showing here. And you can see that there's, you know, the layout of the street as a private street doesn't really fit with, there's kind of corners and things like that that don't really fit. So that means you would have to go back and then be doing work on an already constructed street in private property in order to complete that construction. That would be a little bit difficult, maybe not impossible, but it's certainly not ideal. The other couple things going on there are, you'll notice that bulb is quite large. And so by creating that, it is likely to make this property almost undevelopable, because the cost of cost of that construction is probably going to be quite high relative to the size of lots that are there. So there's just some challenges in terms of trying to change that over later on and then to bring it up to public standards. So that's one, that's really why would it not be public now? Which means, you know, the other solution that we talked about was really basically the road on the north would need to be in another private roadway. Now that private roadway, as I illustrated in my option number 2, it could be done in one of 2 ways. And the first way would be to widen the existing road, or, you know, the roadway that we build right now, basically do a similar thing. It would only have to add about 8 feet or so plus a sidewalk. But like so that is a possibility. The problems that we see there are, like I said, there's not really, basically they would be getting access rights to the road that we're building currently. And these property owners on the south would basically be burdened with maintaining a road for the owners on the north. So that is, that's certainly a cost issue, which, you know, could be problematic in the future. And I don't know how you create a maintenance and access, and you could certainly create the access, you know, the access easement right now, that wouldn't be any problem, but you're locking the people on the north into a maintenance agreement that doesn't yet exist. So that has some potential pitfalls. At that point, you know, that would not be constructed in a way that could become public. So that doesn't really solve this issue like I showed before with the bulb. So even if you widen this out, it still couldn't become a public road at that point, because there's no place to put that cul-de-sac bulb.
And the cul-de-sac is required by city standard, is that what you're saying?
Correct.
So Fred, is there a way around that?
You know, I would rather have Kai Kadam speak on that issue. I think he's still probably on the line. He is our Public Works Director. Kai, are you still available?
I'm still here.
Cool. What are your thoughts, Kai?
What is going to require the cul-de-sac? Is that thought for a fire department turnaround?
Correct. Yeah, I mean, that's my understanding.
So
I think you can only have, don't hold me to this, but I believe it's a maximum of 5 lots without a turnaround.
Yeah, I think it's 8 residences, I think, but five lots or 8 residences. I'm not sure why they couldn't do a hammerhead on the property to the north, if that was the case and the fire marshal didn't allow it to construct as you've constructed your street or proposing. Does that make sense?
What's a hammerhead? You mean just make it wider crosswise?
Yeah, there would be a turnaround. It's pretty typical for narrow streets. They call it a hammerhead, and it would have a section that would look similar to a driveway, either to the south or north of the proposed street there. And it would be striped for fire. It would have red curb markings around it, and the driveway turnaround itself would be marked in red hash marks, and that would be available for fire to turn around. I can say that that hasn't come up during any other conversations with the fire marshal or with the city engineer.
Putting in the hammerhead, you mean?
Put it in a cul-de-sac and that not being feasible.
Okay.
Well, I was referring, I think I was referring to if it were to become a public street. Would it and Kai, so you guys know your code better than me, I apologize if, but my assumption was that your code requires a cul-de-sac if it were to be a public street.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up to see what
Okay.
triggers the requirement.
Okay, I may be wrong, but that was my understanding, and that was kind of what we were looking at on this in previous. So, are there any other questions on that point? Because otherwise, I'll go to the demo of the house.
I do want to say that the street is substandard in its width right now, so it couldn't be a public street.
Right.
My question had to do, if you developed the piece to the north and you made it a wider street, would it then become public? Or could it then become a public street? Because if you had access to the north property, you would no doubt want a wider street to begin with.
I think that is fully our intent.
Thank you. That's what I got from reading the report, is that you were anticipating, should the property to the north be developed, that would become a public street.
That is correct.
Thank you.
As far as the demo of the house, so it is quite possible that house would be demolished. In terms of, yes, we are demolishing the house on the property we're developing, and it certainly is likely that might happen. However, it's not the only possibility for how that property could develop. And essentially, by placing this access from our property on the north line, you are going to be requiring that other property to demolish their house. So essentially, you are going to be, encumbering that property with that requirement, and sort of precluding potentially other possible outcomes. So that's why I made that point. It's certainly not that might not be, that could be the preferred option, but that is at this point unknown, and I guess it's an assumption. So
yeah, because both of your projections show property lines running through that house if you develop that north piece.
Right. We actually, I mean, I was showing how this would develop if it were at a common access point, but there are other ways that this might be able to develop that don't necessarily include that. If the access is not along that route. So in other words, if the access were up at the north, it certainly is feasible that house could be on its own piece of property without having to be demolished, and you could have another one or two pieces developed and take the access off of the north side of that property, essentially kind of mirroring what we were proposing. We're proposing the access on the south, their access could be on the north, and that would allow that existing house to be maintained. So there is another possible development scenario in that. If we move our access to the north, then that development scenario probably becomes more difficult. Certainly willing to answer more on that, but otherwise the third question you asked was about why the storm drain is not deeper. And Fred, could you go to my slide there for showing the profile? And really what this has to do with, it's just a physical limitation of where the existing pipes are. The manhole or the point that we'd be connecting to in the street is shown on the right side of that profile. It's a little difficult to see because we've got a bunch of different pipes showing in the same graph. But the point that we're connecting to is existing and it's fixed. And so it's just not very deep. We can't connect any lower than that point.
Okay.
And so we're starting from that point and working our way up. And then, in terms of what to do with the water on the existing street, there's just, there's not a lot of, without building the lot up really significantly, which wouldn't really, typically we'd like to try to keep the grade as close to the surrounding topography as possible. And so that's just sort of what we're stuck with in terms of this this site and the pipes where we can connect to.
Okay, I wasn't sure which side was the street side, so.
Yeah, it's the side over on the right is where one of those manholes that's showing over there, the shallowest one on the far right is really what we're connecting to.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Just had one quick question for you. It said,
Sure.
This is Alex Podolsky-Ross. It says in your initial that you originally proposed a north end siding for
Mhm.
that entryway.
Right.
And I assume just for all the reasons we were talking about, where it would be sort of closer to alignment, preventing multiple intersections, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, is that still, I mean, it seems like that still would be viable here for the project.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think it certainly can be done on the north. And that was, again, that was our initial instinct, just as, you know, as an engineer, I'm trying to line up accesses. That's kind of what I'm taught to do. And so that was certainly our first inclination. As we talked through it in the pre-development meeting, like I said, it was originally the city that proposed moving it to the south. I was sort of resistant to that approach just because, I'd already kind of thought it out in this way, but the city was actually the one that brought up a bunch of really significant and important issues about how does this develop in the future? Is it public? Is it private? What happens if it's, can it be public? Can it be private? If it's private, what does that do to the adjacent property? What does that do to, the future development there at that intersection? And, after kind of taking that back after our conversation and chewing on it, it really, I changed my mind after, thinking about the feedback that we'd received and felt that it was probably, even though, like I said, neither one of these solutions is code compliant. I guess what you have to decide is, Fred brought up the point of considering how future development will occur. Well, that's certainly what we've been doing through this entire piece. And really it's our driver for why we think that the access should be at the south, in that, you have one of, three different, not very nice looking, and, each of those three options I showed you have potential problems. And if you line them up on the north, you're going to have an access that's offset by about 25 or 30 feet. If you put those accesses on the south line on our property, and perhaps it's on the north line on the opposite one, which would be our, let's just assume that it does kind of the mirror of what we're proposing. Well, again, that doesn't comply with your access spacing standards. However, you get 100 to 125. The one on the north is a little farther. It would be, I believe it would be at least 125. The one that we're proposing right now would be close to that. So you have to ask yourself whether or not 25 feet is better or worse than 100 feet. They're misaligned in either case. It's just a question of how severely. Our opinion was that the alignment offset of 100 plus feet doesn't leave you with that situation where you're staring at the person across the street, wondering who's supposed to turn, and then both kind of start at the same time and create, unsafe traffic movement. So that was just our approach after having wrestled with it and kind of gone full circle.
All right, well, thank you.
Yep.
Fred, has anyone actually submitted plans for the property on the north, or is this all hypothetical and future planning?
This is all hypothetical. Part of the reason why it's even brought up at all is I'll direct your attention to page 26, which item K on page 26 of your packet talks about the future extension of streets. And it says, where the subdivision or partition is adjacent to land likely to be divided in the future, street shall continue through property lines to provide for the orderly division of such adjacent land or the transportation and access needs of the community. And so basically, you know, we're essentially looking at that adjacent parcel. It's almost identical to this parcel. And we say, boy, if this has the potential to develop, that one sure does too. That was basically, I mean, that's at least part of our considerations for this.
Okay, any other questions of Mr. Cedars? Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Cedars. At this time, we're going to move on to testimony from people in favor and folks that are not in favor, but we will be back to ask you questions if needed later. So are there any folks in attendance out there that are in favor? I do have one speaker card here from Mr. Gary Strait. It doesn't list if you're in favor or if you're opposed. So if you're in favor, you can come up and speak now. Do we know that answer, Karen? Hello? Karen, do you know if Mr. Strait is in favor or opposed?
The speaker is opposed.
Okay. Well, then, if we have no one to have testimony in favor, we will go ahead and have testimony in opposition. So at this time, I'll call Mr. Gary Strait to the microphone. And please offer your name and address for the record, please, sir.
Address is 725 Cedar Court.
You're muted.
Karen, can you unmute the speaker?
Okay, hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so I live on Cedar Court, and so my backyard faces the south property line of the proposed development. So I live one house off of the corner. There's a two-story house on the corner, and I live next door to that. So I'm here basically, I've talked to my three other neighbors who were all impacted by this development. So our concern, first of all, is the access or the driveway for these basically running along our north property line, which is their south property line. And so what that's basically doing for us is creating an alleyway. And that's how we see it, is creating an alleyway between the property, you know, in our property line there. Because we're going to be the ones watching all that, you know, the traffic from those four duplexes, you know, go up and down behind our backyards all day long. So that's a concern of ours. If it's approved the way it's in right now with the driveway along the south edge of that property, then what we as neighbors would like to request of the city and or the developers that there be some kind of buffer placed between that driveway and our backyards then, to eliminate the noise, eliminate the view of the cars going in and out of there all day long, and creating that basically alleyway there. Another concern I have is I'm sure that for that access way for the driveway there to be developed there. It's going to have to be excavated. And out of a personal reason, I have a big Western red cedar tree in my backyard. It's not on the property line. It's inset far into my property line. But the thing is that they go to excavate all that. My worry is from that is that when they go to dig all that up, some of them are going to somehow, you know, chop off a bunch of roots, and then I'm going to be stuck with a big dead 30-foot tree that's in my backyard now. So that's a personal concern of mine. The other option I see with this, with the driveways for access for running along that south end of that property, is that's really close now to the intersection of Cedar Court and 7th Street. And if you all know, if you've all been down that way, 7th Street right now is basically a traffic nightmare. It's better now because school's not in session, but it's still a nightmare. And the intersection there at Cedar Court and 7th Street is bad. You know, I'd say you can go out there any time of the day and probably count the cars that run through that intersection. It's a 4-way stop, and you'd be surprised how many people run that thing day and night out there, just run through there. So by having that driveway at the south end of the property, you're not that far from that 4-way intersection right now. So think of it, you're talking 8 cars, max, whatever, driving in and out of that intersection, out of that development. And you've got cars that are at that 4-way intersection going, you know, all different directions, you know, most of them more than the 20 or 25 miles an hour posted speed limit. So all I see is that just is creating another traffic nightmare for 7th Street, which is already a traffic nightmare. But I would see that the driveway on the north end of the property, to me, would make more sense. It's closer to Riverwood Court. It may not line up exactly, but it would be better that way, that just a little zog right there. And since Riverwood Court is also a cul-de-sac, it's not a lot of, there's only maybe, I don't know how many houses are on Riverwood Court, but there's not that many. And the traffic on Riverwood Court is certainly not very much. So if the access for those, if this development was closer to Riverwood Court, I would think that the traffic issue would be much less than what it's going to be when it's there just a few feet from the 4-way intersection. So that's those are our basic concerns, is the driveway along the north end of our property is basically creating an alleyway, and that also the traffic creating yet another drive. Well, it's not necessarily a driveway. It is a driveway, but you're going to have 4 properties off of that driveway, so you're going to have traffic turning in and out of that pretty frequently on a daily basis, and then you're going to be that close to the existing intersection. And Becky said that she also lives south of there, so she already knows what kind of a nightmare traffic situation we have right now. So those are my concerns right now. Thank you.
Corby, you're muted.
Thank you. I keep forgetting that. Any questions from the commissioners for Mr. Straight?
I just appreciate you taking the time and to talk to us. And yeah, thank you for voicing your concerns.
Thank you.
Mr. Straight. Okay, Mr. Cedars, you are given the opportunity to offer rebuttal testimony. So you could, if you have anything to add to what you've already testified to, you may do it at this time.
Sure. I certainly recognize and understand Mr. Straight's concerns there. I think, you know, as far as the traffic impact on the adjacent properties, we were certainly anticipating building a fence along that line, and you know, we could also include a little bit of screening landscaping along there, which I think would help to mitigate the visual impacts. As far as noise, you know, it's going to be a very low speed street, so it's not like there's going to be revving engines and those sorts of things. So we're certainly willing to do that. excavation for the driveway and the impact on the cedar tree. I don't know exactly where that is located. He didn't indicate how far away from the property line, but typically, you know, those root systems for an evergreen are fairly small, so it's not uncommon to impact, you know, some amount, but we could certainly, you know, engage an arborist if we needed to look at that and make sure that we excavate carefully through there. As far as the intersection, you know, I think I've already talked about my reasons for that, so I won't go into those anymore, but that was, I certainly understand the concerns there, so.
Corby, mute.
Technology, man. Any other questions of the commission for Mr. Cedars? Okay, since there are no more questions, I will go ahead and close the public hearing at this time if there's no objections. Okay, so discussion amongst us then. Or does anybody have any more questions of Fred?
Fred, it sounds to me like, I mean, I've obviously heard your recommendations, but it sounds like you and Kai are on the same page on sort of where, I mean, essentially this comes down to traffic, you know, sort of where the cars are going to come out onto 7th. I think that's the most of the sticking point here. And sort of what the next phase will be for that road. So if the other lot develops, what does that look like? Does it stay the same? Does it just stay as a small private road? Does it get widened and expanded and sort of more closer aligned, et cetera? So, I mean, have I kind of captured what you're...
Right. That's a huge, that's the crux of this application. Or I mean, that's one of the key items that you folks are considering. Like Mr. Cedars pointed out, there is some offset even at that location on the north side. Ultimately, sort of based on, I mean, sort of like I said earlier, based on our criteria, based on some of the things that we have about considering adjacent parcels and what's likely to happen on those, that's really why we recommended the condition in the first place. Also, I mean, here, we're in the throes of our transportation system plan update, and we've heard a fair amount of people's concerns about 7th Street. And so not wanting to exacerbate any sort of issues along there is really part of our thinking.
I would like to second what Mr. Street was talking about. I do have an alleyway on the north side of my property, and it doesn't have that much traffic, but it is kind of a bother. And I think that the duplexes would have more traffic than Beacon Lane usually does. I also would rather have the intersection with 7th Street be farther away from Cedar. It just seems less dangerous for cars, people, bicycles. A lot of children live here. They have to go to school clear across the Monmouth Avenue. A lot of people driving their kids or walking their kids. It just makes more sense to have the roadway across, even if it's offset by some feet from the other street, Riverwood Court. And future development makes more sense to have the road to the north also.
I'm sorry, Kate, go for it.
No, I was going to say, I share some of the concern with, we know that 7th is a problem street already and not operating ideally how we would like to see it. And we're adding more development, and we know that there's future growth plan for 7th, or that's a major access point. And so if I am concerned about sort of this ripple effect of these intersections. And so even if we modify it up to that north property line, so it lines up a little bit better with River Road Court, what is that then doing for potential future development, you know, if there is some coming down the line? And that's what we don't really know. We don't have a crystal ball and can't predict that. So I go back to what's kind of best for the conditions that are there now. And truthfully, I am struggling a little bit with the impact of 7th and the alignment of these roadways.
This isn't a, I guess for me, the issue is if none of them are good options, why are we trying to find one to approve? I feel like we have codes for a reason and we're trying to put all these conditions on. I don't understand why we just say you can't do it.
I actually think that the north option works. I mean, from my, I'll try and share my screen. I mean, the offset, and sure, granted, I'm not an engineer. Let me try and share my screen. The first city engineer that I worked with accused me of practicing engineering without a license, right? And so this is probably another one of those instances. But I mean, here you can see, this is the access point. I'm sorry, can you all see my Google Maps there?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Let me stop measuring stuff. You can see this is the existing access point right here to the house, right? I mean, it's right here. This is Riverwood Court. That offset does not seem too bad to me. I mean, you can see across that road, right? If you can see here to here, I think that you got a pretty good idea of what's going on at the intersection. I've driven through worse. So I actually think that this works, and I think that it completely meets the intent of our code, especially if this were to develop and you include and at a certain point this road were to get a little wider. In terms of other design options, though, it's like basically accessing this site is going to run into these access spacing issues, just period. I mean, it's just sort of the nature of how this site works, and putting it on the north side where it's right there, I think it makes the most sense. So that's my 2 cents.
Fred, how wide was that driveway as it was? Because then if they have to expand it, it's going to go south and be more off center.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that it's not an apple and apple quite.
Right. Let me try and show you. Let's see if I can share it again. Let's get out my handy Google Earth measuring tool. So that's 18-ish feet, but again, this is probably the north property line. I don't remember exactly how many feet off, so let's take 20 to right there-ish. So I mean, that's that point to that point is probably more like where you're going to be coming out and looking across from there to there.
Okay, thank you. I just wasn't sure how wide it had to be.
If you go south, how close is it to Cedar?
Well,
your picture doesn't go there because it's
right.
just below. There you go.
Let me try. So, and again, these are approximate. Please don't think that this is not engineering. From that's sort of the southern extent of the road to right there. That's about 140 feet. Again, it's about 100 feet to up here to this intersection. So 140 feet to the center line right there. So that's about 150 feet from the center of that. And then 100 feet right there, if that makes
How
sense.
how backed up can that stop sign get on 7th to where the south access point be versus the north access point?
I'm sorry, I don't, one more time with the question?
So that's a 4-way stop on 7th.
Yeah.
And how far backed up can the traffic get to where like would backed up traffic be affecting the south entrance?
Oh, you're talking this way?
Common
Heading
occurrence.
south on 7th, Fred.
I've been there many times when there are at least 3 cars, one from all different directions. I'm just concerned if you add another car coming in, 140 feet up the road, especially if you've got big trucks coming up or down 7th, north or south on 7th, it creates more of a bottleneck than there already is. Because if you've got cars turning off of Cedar or coming north on 7th or coming south on 7th, and you have cars coming in just before Cedar again, it makes it more awkward and more dangerous for traffic than if you know there's already a road up there at Riverwood. You're looking for traffic there. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, any other comments amongst us or to Fred? I mean, I guess, Fred, this leaving the access point on the north aligns more with the city's plan for the traffic plan. And since the traffic plan is being discussed and possibly be modified, it would, having it to the north would still align more with a newer traffic plan.
Well, I mean, so the fundamental question is, both locations are going to be offset. The one on the north is going to be offset slightly from Riverwood Court, but it would be further away from Cedar Court. The one on the south would be closer to Cedar Court, but more offset from Riverwood Court. And so that's the fundamental question.
Okay, well, here, this is going to be kind of like along Natasha's line of questioning, why would you would allow this to happen at all. Mr. Cedars, if you're still there, if we were to approve this tonight with all the conditions intact, requiring you to build your access point on the north end of the property, would that be a deal breaker for you not to develop this piece of property?
I can't say for sure. I believe that it would be acceptable. I mean, we certainly looked at a layout that way before. Like I said, I think ultimately either one of the, in my opinion, either one of the access points could be constructed. It's really a question of which one is going to provide better functionality for the city. Our preference and belief is for the south one, but I don't believe it would be a deal breaker. I can't speak for the developer for sure.
Okay. All right. Well, or have we reached a point where we made up a decision amongst ourselves that we could have a motion?
Corby, I have one more question. Sorry if I can slip one in. Regarding the water quality, and it sounds like there are some concerns regarding that. I don't know if Kai is still on the phone, if he could weigh in on thoughts on the water quality and it potentially not being able to meet or need an alternative solution.
Okay, yeah, I am still on the line. We actually have updated our public works standards for water quality. And there actually states in there that it's up to the city engineer or the public works director to work with the developer and his engineering team if the conditions are not ideal. So you use a term called BMPs or best management practices, and that's what's in our standard. So we would normally work with them regardless of probably what planning commission decided.
Do you feel like there is a BMP that could be achievable on the site?
I haven't verified the elevations on there, so I can't say for sure.
Okay.
I can tell you that our intent when we adopted that section was to use it.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, back to the motion question. We reached that point where somebody's willing to take a stab at it.
I have a suggested motion. I don't know if it was in the packet, but this is one of our standard templates. A motion to approve the subdivision application, file number SUB 2020-1, adopting findings, conditions, and staff recommendations as provided in the staff report.
All right, is that suitable motion with everybody? If so, is there a second?
Oh, I did make the motion. I just suggested one for.
I'll make the motion that Karen just read.
Okay. Thank you, Becky. A second?
Yeah, I'll second it.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Opposed? Okay, motion passes. All right. Thank you, commissioners. We'll move on to the second item tonight, 7.2, the Liberty Place subdivision extension request.
So, Corby, can we take just like a 5-minute bathroom break real quick?
Oh. Go ahead, Fred.
Or no, like I mean, you guys can consider that Liberty Place one, and basically you guys have extended that a number of times. They're working on phase 3 right now. You guys can consider that. I can run to the bathroom real quick.
Okay.
And then I'll come back for the next agenda item, which is actually was added sort of late. And so, related to code interpretation.
Okay,
So
after this, we have the 7.3 transportation system plan update.
Okay, so you don't have the latest agenda.
Yeah, the 7.4 with the Deer Park.
So I think he's just asking to switch those two. Corbett.
Oh yeah, yeah. So, but you guys can do the Liberty one, and I'll be right back.
Okay. Okay, I guess since Fred left us in charge all by ourselves here for a few minutes, an extension request is just basically a moot point, in my opinion. We're just granting them another year. I know they've had quite a few extensions. Any other comments on that?
I just had one. Living down here, we keep hearing about the pathway that's supposed to go through Inspiration Park and connect further south and come back out towards the river. The pathway stops as you come out of Inspiration Park to Maple. There was supposed to be another pathway on the on the west side of the houses, on the west side of 9th. The city decided, without anybody there knowing it, to put that pathway through that strip of land that they did put a concrete sidewalk in this year, and hopefully we'll put some landscaping in this fall because it's just dirt and weeds now. But even if you go, you have to cross Maple, then you have to jog over to that green space. And then when you get south of at the south end of that, there's no pathway and the houses are all built up. So there's no green path to go further south. That's my question, is where is that pathway that's supposed to go south? The houses have all been built up, as you can see on phase 1 and phase 2. Those are already in and there's no pathway. So I'm just wondering where that pathway is supposed to be.
Okay, well, Becky, when Fred comes back, you can ask him that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm familiar with that, and I've walked it with my wife quite a bit. Isn't there like a little bit to the east when you come off that south end? Isn't there like
there's a concrete pathway that goes one house width.
Right. That's it.
Then there's nothing past that. It's all built up.
Okay.
It's all built in, and there's no unless it's the sidewalks, and that's what's being considered the pathways now.
Okay. Well, when Fred comes back, I'll have you ask that question.
I'm here. I'm here. Let me look. What? Hold on. Shoot. What?
I'm just wondering where that pathway goes, because it doesn't continue. As Colby was pointing out, there's a one house width concrete path that comes into, I don't even know the name of this street that's south of Chestnut. And there's a little concrete path that comes through to that, but there's no pathway south of that through phase 1 or phase 2. Is it supposed to be on the sidewalk, or are we gonna get a park pathway?
Where? I'm not seeing it on the diagram.
I'm just talking about your overall plan. City plan says there will be a pathway that goes south out of Inspiration Garden and then comes back east to the river. And there's no pathway, and I'm just wondering where that's supposed to be. You can go through that green space between Maple and Chestnut, and then there's a little sidewalk that takes you south to the next street, but there's no pathway south of there, even though your plan says there's to be one.
Right. So you're talking about the parks plan? Is that what you're talking about?
I guess whatever your long-range future for the city of Independence and having interconnected pathways and
Right. So that was before my time. My understanding is that is supposed to be a sidewalk. I mean, because I look at it too, and I see that it's a sidewalk. It's in the location where a sidewalk is.
That's my question, because it was supposed to be a pathway like going through a green space.
Right.
So all of this development is going on without consideration of what the city's plan is for the south side of town in terms of pathways, accessibility for all sorts of people, and having green spaces. And if you develop it all and onto the west without making provisions for that, I'm concerned you're going to lose what you were aiming for with your plan.
I understand what you're saying. This development was approved originally in, I think, 2014.
Which is after that plan was in place.
Which was after that plan was in place. That was long before my time.
I understand that.
Yeah, where it's going, where that walkway goes. I mean, I can pull it up. We can try and look at it, but that's, I mean, if we want to do that, I'm more than happy to do it. Just hold on. But let's push this, because I know that we have 2 people in the audience, and I know that we have Jeff Kennedy on the line to talk about a different issue. Let's push this until the next item, so we can let them get out of the meeting and let Jeff go about the rest of his day.
That's fine, and you can let me know how that works at another time instead of tonight.
Okay.
But that would be my question on this future development.
Right. And I'm more than happy to talk about that, because I know exactly what you're talking about. Oops. All right, so let's talk about this code interpretation real quick. Can we talk about that? Can we jump to the next item?
Yep. Go ahead.
All right, so let me pull up something and share it with you. All right, hey. Let me try and screen share one more time. All right. Hey, can you folks see that?
Yes.
I want you folks to tell me what this language means, and and I want you to help me interpret this. We've got a couple out at the air park who have requested to put metal siding on their hangar, and I want help understanding what this language means. Now, in the process of looking at this, I'll give you three options that I see of potentially figuring this out, and you folks can tell me which way to go. I just want your interpretation. So these are our residential design standards. These apply to all residential development. You can see here, exterior siding and cladding. I review every house, every pretty much accessory building, except if they're super small, in the community, and I look at them in relation to these standards. These standards, you can see it talks about siding of a certain width. It talks about shingles. Can you folks see that?
No, we're looking at 48 point.
Oh, whoopsie dipsy. I don't know why it doesn't. I got two screens. I moved it to the other screen and it wouldn't let me transfer this. All right, I'm sorry.
There we go.
Thank you, Becky. So you can see right here, it talks about exterior siding and cladding. It talks about horizontal siding, about a maximum reveal. It talks about shingles, talks about board and batten, talks about brick and stone. And basically every house, we look at these and we make sure that they have these sort of siding things. Now you'll see at the bottom of this page, it says, in order to promote high quality buildings that will be maintained for generations, the following materials shall be prohibited. It says T111 or similar sheet materials, plastic or vinyl. Now, my question for you is, and this is how we have typically interpreted it, and this is how I've interpreted it since I've been here, T111 or similar sheet materials includes sheet metal, is how I've read this. Now, my question for you is, does that include sheet metal or not? It says similar sheet materials is sheet metal, sheet material that's prohibited, or is a similar sheet material as T111 a wood product or something like that, or a cementitious product or something like that? That's my question for you. Now you have three ways to go with this answer from my perspective. You can say, of course, that includes sheet metal because look, it says similar sheet materials. You could say, no, absolutely not. Similar sheet materials are a wood or a cementitious product. Or you could say, you know what? There's a third option, and in the residential single family air park overlay zone, there's the potential to construct a hangar, and it doesn't talk about what siding is on hangars. And hey, a lot of times hangars are big and a lot of times hangars have metal, right? And so you could say sheet materials includes metal in every part of the town except essentially for hangars. So those are my three options for you. Discuss.
Can I start?
Yeah.
Okay, I went up to the air park yesterday, and on the west side of the air park are just the hangars only that look like they have sheet metal on them, but
They absolutely do.
They're
all
not
of them.
part of houses. There's not one hangar in that air park that's built to this day that has sheet metal on it. It's all either or hardy plank siding or horizontal cedar siding. And when I read this, I thought to myself, is there a HOA out there at the air park?
There is a HOA, and when I read their code, it looked like they didn't allow metal, but these folks have gotten approval for them to have metal. They've gotten approval to have it match their lap siding on their house on the street side elevation, but not on the side, but to use metal on the side and the rear.
It's all, those hangars are part of the houses, right? It's all one building?
No,
Some of them are separate, some of them are part of it. And you folks can, Rich and Kathleen Hill are both here, and I imagine that they would be willing to share their thoughts too. Are they still present, Karen?
I'll go look.
And then Fred, we also have Denise Bauer who would like to speak.
Yes.
Okay, well, you want to go ahead and have me call
Sure.
in Kathleen and Richard Hill right now?
Yeah, they're in. They're coming.
Okay, they're muted still. Don't you love this high-tech stuff? Oh, the day we can go back and all be in the chamber room. Okay, if you folks could please state your name and address for the record.
Okay, I'm Richard Hill, and this is my wife Kathleen, and we're building a new house on Stearman Street, 804 Stearman Street. And we've been working on this project for close to 2 years. And in the very beginning, we had planned on putting in the metal hangar. It's made by R&M Steel Company out of Idaho. And it was recommended to me by somebody who's got that same kind of metal hangar on his house. That's on Aronka Street. And there are other people that have the same basic thing, but the big thing that they said was that you have to side the street facing side of the hangar with the same stuff that's on the house. And I'm okay with that. But what I had to do was call the hangar people and have them modify the plans, because the sheathing and the cement siding are not strong enough materials to allow the hangar to maintain its wind rating. So the sheet metal that's on the side of the building is actually a big part of the structure. And if we were to cover that with cement board siding, then that would be a whole bunch of extra expense, which I know doesn't concern a lot of people, but it concerns us. And then it would degrade the metal material underneath it by allowing water and dirt and all kinds of other stuff to get caught between the siding and the metal. Now, this is high quality, good looking metal. And we actually took a piece of metal that the hangar company sent us and took it to the paint store and matched it. And that's the color that's going to be on the house. Now, if we were troublemakers, we'd probably paint it purple, but we're not. We want a nice looking place. And the way this is set up, the only thing that anybody's going to be able to see is the side that faces the street, and then only a little tiny part of it. It's 50 feet wide, and that's 50 feet of cement board siding facing the back of our house, which that's okay, because that's the rule. But nobody had said anything at all to us about continuing this around the whole building until Fred came up with nope, it's got to have lap siding on it. And that's the first I'd heard of it. And in the meantime, we'd spent close to $5,000 getting this thing ready to get a permit. And then when we came down and got the permit, they had that addition on there. And, you know, I just tend to kick back against additions like that don't make a whole lot of sense. And he's showing me in the planning thing here, in order to promote high quality buildings that will be maintained for generations, the following materials shall be prohibited. Now, T111 is nowhere near similar to sheet metal. This sheet metal is 50 thousandths of an inch thick. It's solid stuff, and it's painted well and made to last. The paint is supposed to last 40 years, according to the people that sold us the place. And you can't get a paint job on a cement board siding house to last 20 years without looking shabby.
So a couple things in addition to that is that we went to the HOA in July a year ago, and it was approved. And it was approved even without adding the siding on the front. But we went back and had it re-engineered, paid more thousands of dollars in order to have it re-engineered because we felt it would have a better look and would then comply with the city and HOA. There would be no questions. And when you look at the exterior siding and cladding on the page that Fred had referenced, you can see under number 1, there's C, which is board and batten vertical siding, which this metal hanger is created to look like that. So it has that look, and it comes already painted and well structured. So we're looking at, I think in the previous discussion point, Fred had talked about the, are we meeting the intent of the code? And so I believe that we are meeting the intent of the code. You have to know that this is the second phase. Our house was the first phase, and we went through the first phase and we hired an architect person who draws plans right here from the local area and had him draw it up for us. We hired a builder from the local area to build our home for us. And right at the crux of starting our home to be built, Fred had a different interpretation than both the builder as well as the person who designed, and he's designed many, many homes in the area. And as a result, we had to add almost 70 square feet to our house, which is, over $16,000 right at the beginning of our house plan. And so we did that. We did that in good faith. We felt a little bullied into it, but we did do that. And now we're coming up against here, and we're not made of money. We just want to have a wonderful home. We want it to be our forever home. Obviously with that, already, not only the $16,000 plus upfront that we had to pay out of my pocket for that, but forever we'll be paying extra taxes. And it's a room that's a guest room. If I had wanted, 78 square feet added to my home, it would have been to other areas where we live. For example, my master bathroom or my bedroom or the living area. But this was all to meet a code or the code as Fred had aligned for us, and it was aesthetics. And so now we're talking about somewhat aesthetics again, reaching very deeply into our pockets, probably $20,000 or more on top of what we've already paid in addition. And so we're at the point where we really, really felt like we needed to have this discussed because, we had spoken with other people at the airport. We had spoken, I know some people had spoken to Jeff Kennedy on our behalf, and this was the first we'd heard of it, just last week. So we're looking at doing things in good faith. We would like to live in Independence. We would like to live at the airport. It's getting to the point where it's really putting it out of our price range to be able to finish our home and certainly to have a hangar out there. My husband has, the only reason we would be there is for the airport and to have the hangar.
Okay, any of the commissioners have any questions of the Hills?
Just one quick clarification. You said one of the houses on Aranca has, or one of the buildings has similar setup already that's been approved, and
Yes. So
okay.
it's a metal hanger that's actually part of the house.
Okay.
And ours is separate from the house.
Okay.
So it's even further back. It's in the back corner of the lot. And then there's two, if you know, on Stearman, that's the one that has the two taxiways behind it. So we're even further away from our backyard neighbors. And of course, that's the side that has the 40-foot long by 14 feet high, the long,
the door,
the hangar door. So, you know, that shouldn't be an issue. And our neighbors have said they have no problems whatsoever, either with our home or with our proposed hangar.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You said there were other houses. Did they also have to cover up the metal siding, or do they have their metal siding too, or?
No, it's exposed for all to see.
The metal siding?
Yes.
Okay.
You might have to go out on the air park side on the taxiway to see it, but that's going to be the case at our house also. You won't be able to see anything that looks like metal siding from the street.
Thank you.
So, so I mean, here's part of the issue is, I mean, we have told folks, I mean, we get questions a lot, especially with the metal carports, right? We get metal carports in here a lot. And people come in with those and they ask, hey, can we put this in? We say, yeah, you can put in a metal carport, but you can't have metal siding on it. You have to put lap siding on it. I
would really beg to call a very huge.
I know. I was actually going to make a different point. So, so I mean, so the point that I want to make is essentially, yeah, we use that code. So I mean, understand that. I actually think that the best way to go about it is to consider a hangar as a different animal, right? And to keep the sheet materials as reflecting metal, but that not have that applied to hangars, and then rely on the air park to sort of administer their HOAs as they see fit, to control what those hangars look like. That is sort of my recommendation for you folks. What are your thoughts about that?
We would appreciate that, especially since it was already signed off almost 15 months ago, as stated.
I would like to make sure that everybody knows that I like Independence as a city. I think you guys have done a wonderful job of making this city look better. So it really bothers me that I have to come in here and plead my case against somebody who works for Independence, because you guys have done such a wonderful job everywhere else. But my case is different in that I'm not dealing with carports, and I'm not out there trying to make things look ugly. You know, my purpose in even considering this is to have a place to live where I can park my airplane, where I don't have to pay somebody else rent to keep it there. And I want to have a building there that's going to stay nice for a long time. So I'm getting old and I don't want to have to get out and pressure wash everything every week. And, you know, that's the object of my direction of thought, is to make it maintainable, even for a guy with minimal skills left over. And you know, that's just, you know, we've been whipped like rented mules about the things that the air park wanted. And so it really kind of surprised me that something got thrown into the permit process like this. So please consider our plea.
So the plans for the hangar are such that a horizontal siding will be visible from the street at the back side of your house, but the sides in the back would be this metal.
Correct.
Is it like a 2-foot wide metal or a 16-inch wide, like high rib, val rib type product? You know,
What are we talking about again?
on the type of metal, the pattern of the metal, is it like a 16-inch?
Well, it looks like the metal that they use to build all the hangars on the other side of the street. It's that same kind of metal.
It's wider.
But it's going to be, yeah, it's wider. The panels are, what, 2.5 or 3 feet wide. So it doesn't really visually relate to anything that's going to be running horizontal.
Right.
Because it's bent the way it's bent as a part of the structure. And when I first told the building people that I was going to put cement board siding on the side facing the street, they said, "Oh no, you're going to have to redesign all of the structure behind that, because that other stuff is not as strong as the sheet metal that we designed the building with." So they had to redesign and put new structural support pieces inside that back wall so we could use sheathing and cement board siding. And, you know, that's really kind of a shame for an all metal building to have partial, you know, wood and cement siding on it. But they've modified it so we can do that to please the HOA's desire to have the appearance from the street being all the same.
So that it was in your HOA that you do the horizontal siding is visible to the street, right?
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah, that was one of their requirements, and we agreed, and they signed off on it when we went to the architectural committee.
All right. Any other questions from commissioners? And we do have another person, Dennis Bauer, that wishes to speak, Fred. And then somebody mentioned Jeff.
She's here in support of us.
Oh, okay.
Jeff Kennedy, baby.
Jeff is in here, or he's on the phone to help you folks. This Denise Bauer has marked on her speaker card. She definitely wants to speak. She doesn't.
She has changed her mind.
Okay.
I just got a note.
Okay. Okay, any other questions then of the Hills commissioners? Okay, thank you, Hills.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Well, in the light of that new information, I guess I'd be willing to go along with their plan, Fred. As long as they are going to continue to have the horizontal, because when you drive down those streets and make the turn in the cul-de-sac, you can't see the north and east and west sides of the hangars in that particular block. I know exactly the house they're speaking of. You'd only see the south side of their hangar, which would have the horizontal siding on it. So
Fred, I'd like to move forward with the allowing hangars an exception for metal, because the part of the code is about longevity, and I don't consider sheet metal to be as turnoverable as T111. And so I would like to move forward with that if the other commissioners also agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's letter of the law versus spirit of the law, or letter of the code versus spirit of the code. And I think this is just one of those things that probably, I assume, just gets kind of lumped in together. It's not as a separate category because it hasn't been addressed. And I think they do have an HOA. I mean, if they made it through the HOA,
Yep.
It seems like that's the backstop here. So
Cool.
I totally agree with Alex's point about the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. They've clearly met the spirit of the requirements.
And I think those metal hangars are very consistent out there at the air park. I mean, so it's not like they're proposing something new and out of the ordinary that you can't kind of look around and see other examples of. And I wonder, Fred, if that language was trying to be specific more to like corrugated sheet metal that you would see kind of on a shed or something like along those lines.
Yeah.
I don't think that's at all the intent of what the air park is. I mean, nor would it be. nor would that be a viable option out there for them.
Well, and presumably the other pieces got approved along the way. Is it just because it's detached instead of attached that it creates an issue? I mean, I guess what's the, because it's out, they said that there's another house out there that has the same stuff. It didn't, you know, and you know, either got approved or didn't, you know, kind of flew under the radar, no pun intended.
Yeah, I honestly, I don't know what house they're talking about. So
okay, yeah, no worries.
I wasn't.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, Becky, do you have any thoughts on this?
No, not really. Seems like they are complying with what, as the other people have said, with what the HOA is saying. And that's pretty much what we need to follow too.
That's tough. Yep. How about you, Natasha?
I don't have anything to add.
Okay. I would imagine then, Fred, we're all in agreement to go ahead and allow the metal siding on the 3 sides and the horizontal siding on the south side of the hangar.
And then that similar materials language still applies to sheet metal, but it just doesn't apply to hangars in the air park area.
Yes.
Great.
You agree with that?
So does that mean you'll present like a adaptation to the air park rules that we'll have to vote on too at a later time?
No, basically you folks are, anytime I have a code interpretation, I'm supposed to bring it to you guys because I'm not supposed to interpret the code by myself. A lot of times that looks like a sort of a public hearing sort of framework, but this was sort of like pressing and kind of urgent, and it was like also it doesn't just apply to one property. This applies, I mean, like I say, we get those metal carports in here all the time. So the interpretation of this standard just doesn't apply to them.
Okay.
So.
Fred, this is Sally. I highly recommend you flag this part of the code to make it more specifically stated so you don't have to have this discussion again. If there's any question about it here, you're going to get another question.
Yeah, well, it's interesting.
Put the words so the words say exactly what they say and no one has to interpret what the words mean.
Yeah, that's right. I think that makes sense. You know, I had Karen look through old code and there was, and both Jeff and Karen had the memory that there was specifically stuff about metal in the code at a certain point, but we can't find it in there now. There was also specific provisions about pole barns that got removed at a certain point. So, anyways, yeah, no, I definitely, I thank you for that, Sally, because I mean that's a good sentiment, well expressed. So.
Okay. So we're in agreement on this item then. Okay. So we'll go back and revisit the Liberty Place subdivision extension request then. Is that something we need to vote on, Fred?
Fred, do we need a motion on your sheet metal interpretation?
I don't think so. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that everybody's sort of has a consensus about what that means.
Okay. Would a motion on that cement this issue then? Or
yeah, I mean, feel free. I mean, I'm more than happy to get a motion.
Okay. Who's brave enough to stab at this one?
Yes, I will. I mean, I'll move that hangars, particularly in our air park community, are a exception to the sheet material rule for the construction of a hangar.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Okay, at least it's in the record, so.
Perfect. Hey, and Jeff, thanks for hanging around that whole time. I don't know. All right. We assume he's still there. His name is still on the phone. So back to Liberty. I did pull up the map. Hey, let's see if I can share the proper screen this time. Oh dear. Where is it? There it is. Can you folks see it? See this map here?
Yep.
Yep.
There's the map.
Perfect. So what Becky is asking about, this is Sunset Meadows Park, I imagine, right here. And this is coming south out of there. Again, this subdivision was approved without that trail originally. I don't know exactly how, but I mean, even the phases that are done right now, phases 1 and 2, that's where this trail is. Phases 1 and 2. Phase 3 is out here. So that's sort of that's that situation. Are there any questions about that?
My question is, if it's not in this one, will the city require it in other plans that are going into the west to complete their trail?
Well, I mean, it's a good question. You know,
we took out the like the fee in lieu. This is my first planning commission meeting, like a year and a half ago. Does the Brandy Meadows approval, and we took out the fee in lieu because otherwise you could pay a fee to not build a park.
Right. We specifically
we specifically removed that condition, and I don't think that had been done before.
Right.
It's not up to the city whether they can choose to pay or whether they have to provide space.
It gives the planning commission the opportunity to do that, but I mean, we specifically, as part of that Brandy Meadows, said, yeah, we want parkland here because it was essentially this portion of this trail right here, and we said specifically, hey, we want to connect this trail right here. And we also looked at some of the other maps in here and said the basis for this is this parks plan. Now, why they didn't do something similar as part of this, I honestly don't know.
So there is a trail in Brandy Meadows because it isn't in phase 1 or 2, I don't think. You took out part of that part.
No, it's this trail right here. It's just not this trail. It's this trail right here. That's absolutely still there. I think you're thinking about the Southwest plan, which shows a trail on both sides of this, and then it also showed a trail right here along the eastern boundary.
Right.
Right. Right. So, I mean, yeah.
So that trail is still going to be put through all of that purple?
This purple right here, absolutely. I mean, this is definitely, this right here, this is the South Fork of Ash Creek. And so long as I'm here, I'm gonna require a trail along the South Fork of Ash Creek, like every development, because it's in our plans, it's in multiple plans, right? Now, how this connects, we always need to be thinking about this. Like, I mean, this Mountain Fir, this doesn't show a trail right here. I mean, frankly, this is showing this as a pedestrian path, but Mountain Fir Avenue is going to be an arterial street. So, I mean, that's a path on an arterial street right there. It's not there right now, but in all of our plans, this Mountain Fir Avenue is going to be an arterial street. So that's a path along a street. Now, why doesn't it show it this way? Why does it stop right there? Who knows? But I mean, there's going to be pedestrian facilities right here as well, right? There's
Mountain Fir will go all the way west to 16th, right?
That's the plan eventually.
Okay. I just have neighbors who are asking. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
So obviously we need to vote on the extension request. Anybody have any more comments on that before we entertain a motion? No more comments? Pretty straightforward on that one. I'll entertain a motion on that.
I move to grant the extension request for Liberty Place subdivision SUB-01-2014 as outlined in the packet.
I'll second that.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. All right, moving right along to the transportation system plan update, Fred.
So, okay, like, boy, I was sure hoping that we could have more time to talk about this, but it is 9:30 and I won't like keep you any longer. Essentially, there's an open house going on for the transportation system plan. There's a survey online. I mean, I could show you that real quick too. But essentially, shoot, let me show it to you. What I want to encourage you folks to do is go online and seriously share your thoughts about transportation and independence. And seriously, if you have specific thoughts, hold on, let me share it. Oops, I got to put it on this other screen. I've learned my mistake. Uh-oh. Oh, where did it go? All right. There it is. All right, so this guy right here, there's a survey online. Basically, we're asking specifically about the key issues that we've identified, right? We know that particular intersections are bad. Now we're asking folks, do you have any creative ideas about how to address these things? And the reason that we're asking is because, you know what? Some of these issues are difficult, right? So we want people to be thinking about potential alternatives to address some of the transportation issues that we see in the community. So think outside the box, but also like give also your thoughts about some of these things. Like, I mean, seriously, I'll just give you, I'll give you 3 of them. What do you do with Main and Monmouth, right? What is the strategy? Main and Monmouth is the main intersection in downtown. You add 5,000 people to the city. What's going to happen to that intersection, right? The consultant comes up with the idea, hey, we could add a little roundabout in there. They also came up with the idea, hey, we could add a turn lane and a stoplight, right? Basically, all of those things like take away parking, pedestrian space, all of those sorts of things. So from my perspective, those are not the best alternatives that we can come up with. What are some good potential ones? I've been sort of standing out on the street and one person, maybe a couple of people say, hey, create some sort of bypass around downtown, not a big bypass, but sort of a short little thing where people who know about it can hop on it. Now, one of the things that somebody said is, hey, if you do that, you're going to need to figure out how to get them back onto Monmouth Avenue, right? And so it's like, oh, that's actually an interesting idea. How does that look? Now, seriously, things like that. If you've got ideas about stuff like that, or if you got some sort of idea about thinking outside the box, let me know. Write it down, right? Share your ideas, seriously. Second one is, okay, how do you accommodate bikes or non-motorized travel from here to Monmouth, right? What's the way? If anybody comes up with a great idea that I haven't thought of or considered, I will give them $20, right?
Bribery.
I mean, seriously. But I mean, it's absolutely true. I've thought about it so much, and there's just a limited number of options. Like, I actually had an idea the other day that I hadn't had before, and I thought, yes, great. So seriously, if somebody else has a different idea, getting bikes, non-motorized travel between here and Monmouth, I will give them $20, right? All right. Now the third one, shoot, I don't know. There's a couple of sort of significant issues. I don't know. I won't even throw one out there. I mean, okay. How about Polk in Maine, right there by Los Primos? What do we do with that intersection? What is the strategy there? It's a major freight intersection. Cars are going pretty fast. What do you do at the bridge, right? Can't, you know, so I mean, there's a couple of really sort of thorny, difficult issues. And when you add 5,000 people in a city of 10,000 people, they're really challenging issues. So participate in the survey, but not only that, share unique and creative ideas that we haven't thought of, right? So that's my spiel. Any questions about that?
No. What's the take rate on the survey completion right now? Like, how many people have you had fill it out?
You know, I don't know. We were gonna do a little Facebook push and really ask those questions about like, what would you do at Maine and Monmouth? What do you think about a roundabout? And really try and like sort of like hit the hornet's nest with a stick, you know, sort of thing, and like hopefully get some response that way. But then we got the fires going on, and it just doesn't feel like it's a good time to be asking people about transportation. So I don't think it's been near so good as I want it. I've gotten good information standing on the street and just randomly talking to people, but still, even that's not enough. So
Can you extend your date?
we've extended it once. We extended it again so it's going until I think it's next Monday at this point. But if it's still super smoky all this rest of the week, we might extend it out one more week.
Alrighty. Any other comments, questions, discussion, informational items to discuss?
So that's independencetsp.com. Fill out the survey, independencetsp.com.
We'll all do that, Fred.
Cool.
All right.
This is shorter than the last one.
This is, they put the original out and it was a way longer survey, and it was like, no, this is way too long. And so they cut it back. This is much easier to use. So if you went to it earlier and you were like, man, I can't spend that much time to fill out that survey, this one's way easier. Encourage everybody in your neighborhood to fill it out, Becky. You're on mute.
I did, and Jason put it on our neighborhood Facebook page too. So.
Cool. Thank you, Jason.
Okay. Well, if there's nothing else left to discuss, this has been a long meeting, longer than normal. So welcome to that, Becky. This is not the normal usually around here, but it's good to have these meetings every now and then to keep us on our toes. So with that, I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
We have a second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Yay.
We're adjourned. All right. Thank you, everybody.
See you, everybody. Thank you. Appreciate you.